My name is Judith Raum. I'm a visual artist and researcher, author, and for this exhibition, The Event of a Thread, I was commissioned to do artistic research on the textile workshop of the Bauhaus. The moment when you invited me was quite a difficult moment because the three major archives in Germany that hold items on the Bauhaus textile workshop all closed at the same time, more or less, because they all started to do renovations for the big centennial, the 100 years anniversary of the existence of the Bauhaus. I was only able to get a very tiny number of appointments in one of the archives in Berlin, the Bauhaus archive. People were also quite restrictive at that point already with what they were able to show me. So I was presented a few samples of fabrics for functional fabrics, curtain material, wall spanning material, as well as upholstery material to put on sofas or chairs. Seeing the fabrics in original and even being able to touch them was a very deep experience because each of these fabrics was so distinct and so specific in its quality. Some of them had stiff yarns, some of them had soft and flexible yarns, some of them were warm in your hand, some were cold and cool and shiny and glossy, some felt almost like paper, some of them had a almost metal-like quality. I was so struck by those different sensual tactile qualities that I thought, wow, this is something I really want to work on. I think it really triggered something in me as a painter. So I picked up on these functional fabrics and thought this should be the main focus in the installation. In Tilburg there's a textile museum and they have a huge collection. Among it is an estate by one Bauhaus weaver who is called Lisbeth Österreicher. And my luck was that nobody had done research on that estate yet. So it was lying there in boxes and nobody had really studied it intensely. When I went through all the cardboards Lisbeth Österreicher had compiled, were different fabrics that I thought I knew already from images, from photographs of the time, of the 30s or late 20s. And it turned out that Lisbeth Österreicher, this weaver, had actually collected fabrics by her colleagues, such as Annie Albers, Gunther Stölzel or Otti Berger. So there were a lot of very rare fabrics among this estate, some of them even fabrics that had thought to be lost. An Annie Albers fabric that people thought existed only 3 times in the world, a famous wall spanning fabric, I discovered there again, together with its technical draft, an explanation how to reweave it basically, but also another fabric that is famous from the front cover of the Bauhaus magazine that was published throughout the 20s and early 30s. That is a curtain fabric, a very transparent material by Margaret Leichner. This was thought to be lost completely, and a small tiny sample of it was actually existent in this estate by Lisbeth Österreicher. From the beginning, apart from the fact that I thought the functional fabrics were really much more interesting than the carpets, the rugs and the wall hangings that they produced at the textile workshop, which are rather famous nowadays. They are all unique pieces and they are easy to photograph and to depict in illustrations because you always show them in a frontal way, like a painting. I thought they were rather uninteresting. I was much more interested in the functional fabrics where you have to work more with the tactile quality of the fabric. So you also have to find ways how to photograph it or how to show it. Annie Albers is in everybody's mouth, but many other individuals and artists who were part of the textile workshop are somehow lost in our shared memory. So for the Bauhaus Space, for the installation here in the show, I decided to have Otti Berger very prominently present. She also left behind a lot of texts. She was an active writer about her work. So I tried to make her speak as much as possible with her personal works next to the fabrics, but also Gunther Stölzel, who directed the textile workshop for many years and was the only female form master at the Bauhaus, has a prominent position. Well, the most basic decision was to say we need to do re-weavings of the fabrics. It was clear we wouldn't have any loans for that exhibition, and I didn't want to work just with photographs. You need to experience these fabrics in original. You need to be able to touch them. You need to be able to hold them against the light, see are they semi-transparent or fully transparent or not transparent at all. To experience all these qualities is only possible if you have the actual fabric in your hands. The second component in the space are the original words of the weavers. You both have a chronological path that you can follow. You see how things developed from the Weimar years to the Dessau years, but you also have certain aspects highlighted within the installation, such as gender issues that played an important role at the Bauhaus and also in the textile workshop. The fabric, the textile was always thought to be a female medium associated with women, which is a cliché. Within the installation, there's a video dedicated to that subject matter. You also have a possibility to experience the sources, the raw materials, where these fabrics come from. You have yarns that you can experience in their single form. Are they knobbed? Are they shiny? Are they thick? Are they thin? To understand where does the composing and invention come from when you develop a fabric. And you also have other aspects such as collaboration with the industry, what are industrial standards, how does that influence your creative process, and maybe most importantly, the question of experimenting and exchange of knowledge within the workshop. In my research, I found out that obviously the weavers were intensely exchanging fabrics among each other and sharing their developments, so that sometimes you have a difficulty distinguishing which fabric was made by whom, because they are very similar, because people obviously were influenced by what a colleague showed them, or they were even weaving on the same yarn, on the same warp. So it could easily happen that 2 or 3 people in a row would sit on the same chair doing their fabrics one after the other, but on the same warp, on the same yarns. So you have the problem of blurred authorship or anonymous authorship also very often in these fabric. We were dependent on finding yarns that equaled as much as possible the original yarns and the original fabrics. And that was not easy, because we're talking about a time that is now 90 years behind us, the 1920s, early 30s. And the yarn industry, or the textile industry in general, was on a total different level than it is nowadays, especially in the area of synthetic fibers or viscose, which was at the time called artificial silks. And so we had, on the one hand, gifts, for example, from one art institution in Germany, an art academy in Halle, the Burg Giebichenstein, and they had supplies of yarns that date back to those years, to the 20s and 30s, and they were so generous and leave them to us as a gift. But then in other fabrics, such as the wall-spanning fabric designed by Kitty van der Mildecke, this semi-transparent, beautiful fabric with horizontal stripes in 2 colors. There we had the problem that the cellophane ribbons, this material that the weft is being produced with, the horizontal stripes, this practically doesn't exist anymore nowadays. So we had to use a kind of raffia material that is in dimension and quality and shine pretty similar to the original material, but chemically it's really not the same. Also, we couldn't find it in the same colors as the original fabric has. The original fabric is in orange and green. Here a pale blue and a yellow, to show the designer decided for 2 colors alternating with each other. The curtain fabric by Otti Berger, which you also see in the background. Already the sample I'm holding here, when you look at reverse side and front side, is quite glossy because of this highly glossy artificial silk that's used in the fabric. But in the original, even this fluffy material that is creating the broader diagonal stripes and is a kind of effect yarn that has little loops in it, even this material was glossy. Another example that in the installation is part of that area where you have the samples of fabrics is this upholstery fabric by Gunther Stölzel. For me, it was really important to have these reconstruction of fabrics in the show, also for people to make it possible to turn the fabric, you know, to discover the back and the front side. Because often, first of all, the reverse side, the back side, is very intriguing and very aesthetic, but also you understand the construction of the fabric only if you can see both sides. And in these valleys, the yarn from the reverse side shows this white, so you almost have like little eyes. And this is specifically apt for an upholstery material because the back side, this cotton, is easy to stretch, whereas the front side, the wool, is resistant and you can brush it and it will not take up too much dust. I think it was a quite alternative atmosphere in the textile workshop, because there was a master, but as we can see in the sources, Helene Börner was her name, she was not really trained in all kinds of weaving techniques. They collected fabrics from whatever they could get and glued little samples of them in notebooks and analyzed in detail how they were made. It was really a tool to learn by studying the material that a colleague had produced, and by asking her, how did you make that? They exchanged knowledge and updated knowledge. When Walter Gropius had encouraged closer collaboration with the industry, they have speakers come in from different industrial branches. Also, how to dye yarns, how to treat fabrics with chemicals that should make them resistant against moths, for example. There were all kinds of innovations, industrial innovations, that speakers who were invited into the textile workshop spoke about. The Bauhaus owned a library. They had a certain number of books, and among them were also books that depicted early samples of textile art, for example, from the region of Persia, Iran, Iraq. There's also Egyptian, Coptic examples. We know that Otti Berger and Annie Albers, for example, had an ongoing exchange on fabrics. They often met at home and talked about fabrics, and also talked about fabrics of older cultures. We know, for example, that Otti Berger spent 3 months in a weaving school in Stockholm to be trained there, and came back and probably brought that knowledge then to the school. Otti Berger's, the material she left behind because of her terrible death in Auschwitz, is really dispersed over the globe. So we have material in Germany, we have fabrics in the Netherlands, in Switzerland, in Great Britain, but most importantly in the US. So the video on Otti Berger is composed of close-up shots onto her fabrics that are actually part of very different and very far archives, and the words that you hear in the video are purely her words. I wanted to dedicate that film to her and her deep insight into the material she worked with.
They know that not every material is suitable for every structure. Not every color goes with every material. Material changes through structure. Color changes through material and structure. Smooth structures reflect light, but rough structures almost suck up the light, forming shadows. In this context, it is possible to speak of sculpting in fabric. Fabric becomes a form of expression. So why do we still need flowers, vines, ornaments? The fabric itself is alive.
The other film, the image material, is compiled again from different archives worldwide. And in my narrative line, I'm trying to reflect gender issues at the Bauhaus, but also how the medium textile was treated among the other crafts, how it was always treated as an inferior medium somehow, giving support to the other elements, how the authors were not named, remained anonymous in advertisement materials, and so on.